My screen is visible, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, hello all. Today we'll be discussing some functionalities in number theory with phase map. So, these are some of the topics that we'll be covering. So, like we already know, the area of number theory is essentially just the study of this set of integers, right? So, at least a big chunk of it is studying this set of integers. So, before we start exploring some ideas in this set, it's nice. It would be nice to have some nice mathematical structure for this set. So the most obvious choice, since we want to look at both of these operations, addition and multiplication, would be to choose a ring of integers. So how we do that in Sage is just write ZZ and then it gives you the integer ring. Now, with this integer ring that we've defined, we can do a couple of things in Sage. So I can check if a particular element is in that ring. So for instance, -1 obviously is an integer, so isn't that integer ring. But something like say 0.5, it will return false because it's not in the ring, obviously. Other than that, we can also look for some random elements in ZZ. So for instance, -1, and every time I rerun this cell, I'll get some different integer. Right. One thing to note is that these outputs aren't completely random. We'll discuss this later. These outputs are essentially pseudo-random. We'll discuss how pseudo-random integers are generated briefly in the next section. We can also look for check for properties of this string that we've defined. So, for instance, is Z commutative? It will return true. Finite, obviously, it's not finite, so it will return false. So, like this ring, we can also define what's called a ring of integers modulus from n. So essentially, if I just list out the elements here, like it will just give me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Now in this case, we know that this set also forms a field, right? Because for every element, I can also find an inverse here. So I can check things like that too. Let's start with something like is underscore finite, and then it will return true, and then I can also check for if it's a field or not. And that will also return true. So this is how we define structures essentially in SageMath. So now that we have a definite structure in place, we can move on to study some properties of these.
Kanak, better you keep both of them, finite as well as field. Later, when somebody refer this.
Okay, yes. Okay, so now that we have a proper structure in place, we can go on to study properties of these sets, elements of these sets like divisibility, congruences, prime numbers, etc., etc. So let's quickly go over that as well. So checking divisibility in Sage is pretty simple. What you do is just check if 11 divides 121, and if it does, the output will be true. But for instance, if I say something like 122, the output will be false. The equivalent of this, like we've already seen, if I don't want to use any inbuilt functions at all, I could just say that use the percentage operator. So does 11, and then give me this, and I can just check if it's 0. Oh, sorry. Here. Right. So both of these operations are essentially equivalent. So now that we know we have a concept of divisibility on our set, if we collect all the divisors, we want to know if there's some greatest divisor. So for instance, the greatest common divisor of 10, 100 would be 10, and I could choose something like say 145, and then it would give me 1. So any guesses as to how Sage actually computes this GCD? Anyone?
I'm guessing Euclid's algorithm.
Yeah, that's right. So essentially what we're doing is we just pick some integers a and b, we rewrite them as a is equal to bq plus r, and then the GCD of a and b at every step will be just the GCD of b and r. So this is a basic example here. So So while this is not 0, I mean, the way you can look at it is when this becomes 0, you just go back to the penultimate step. So you can just quickly code that out here as well. And if I turn the verbose on, you can actually see each one of those steps. So here I've defined GCD as user defined GCD. So we've taken numbers 270 and 192, for instance. So you can actually see each one of those steps. Now if I comment this out, because we don't always need those steps, it will just give me the GCD here. Now, one common question you can ask is, if I have a list of integers, how will the GCD be computed? So that's pretty easy. I just take pairwise GCD. So I'll take the first two elements of my list, compute their GCD, then the GCD of that with x3 and so on and so forth till xn. So I'm essentially extending this function that we defined here recursively. So yeah, so this is user defined extended GCD. That is why the name. Okay, so now that we have this concept of divisibility and GCD at hand, we can also move on to study what are called prime numbers essentially. So before that, how we identify prime numbers is if it has no, I mean, it should obviously be a natural number greater than 1. Now, if it has no non-trivial devices, I mean, if it only has non-trivial devices, it's a prime, and then if it's not, it's a composite number. So for instance, if I have 100, it has non-trivial devices. And if I say choose something like 3, it will only have the trivial device. One thing to notice that Sage doesn't return 1, but if I have -3, it will give me -1. So, okay. And then we also have this inbuilt function for checking if a number is prime, essentially. So, suppose for instance 283 is prime, something like 158 wants to be prime. So, we'll study how primes are actually determined in this field. So there's a section called primality testing algorithms. We'll be looking through some of them. So, but before moving to that, let's just quickly run through some more inbuilt functions in SageMath. So there's next prime. So what's the next prime after 2? Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be a prime itself. So I could have something like 15, and it would give me the prime that comes after 15. Similarly, we have a previous prime as well. And then there's prime range. So from 3 to 7, I mean between 3 to 7, 3 is included, 7 is not. It will give me all the primes. It will just list out all the primes. And then prime pi is essentially just the length of this list that it's returning. So for instance, if I were just to print out this, right? So here it's just counting the number of primes here. Okay, so now let's go back to this question that we were talking about. How does Sage exactly verify that a given number is, I mean, my input is prime or not? So one thing you can do is you can just add 2 question marks here and then run this prime, and then it will give you the entire documentation. But we won't be doing that because the algorithms that they've mentioned are a hybrid of many algorithms. So for instance, some of them are probabilistic tests, which we won't be getting into in this discussion. But can anyone think of some basic algorithm to test if my, okay, I guess we'll start and then try to optimize our algorithm. So obviously non-trivial factors, when I say non-trivial, I mean other than 1 and the number itself. So it shouldn't be 1 or it shouldn't be in itself. So obviously it's all of those non-trivial factors will lie in this set, right? It will start from 2 and it will go up to n-1. So what I can do is I can pick every element in this list, so to say, and then check if it divides n. And if it does, I'll just append it to some list, some empty list. And whenever the count of this goes greater than 0, since we're not including 1 and the number itself, I just break out of the loop and then declare the number prime, right? So let's just try running that here. So this is what I've done. Again, my range is 2 to n. Here I've taken n because the endpoint by default is not chosen. So we're going up to n minus 1 itself. Okay, so now that I have run the function, I have a list of primes with me to help us here. So this corresponds to the year, and here on the left we have the largest prime that was known in that year. So for instance, with this function that we have defined, if I run this prime, it will return to that it is indeed a prime. But this prime was discovered in, I believe, 1732 by Euler. But if I go back to the next year, there's a mix-up there. No, there's not. If I go back to the next prime, the next largest prime, it was discovered in 1772. This function here falls short. I mean, I've tried it before, and the kernel dies because it has too many divisions to compute. So now, can anyone think of some optimization here to reduce the time complexity of our function?
You can reduce it to root n.
Okay, that's actually a step ahead of what I was thinking, but we'll come to that as well. One option is you could just look at integers, I mean, in this range essentially. So why this is true is you could just try it out for yourself. You could write 6 as 1 times 6, 2 times 3, 3 times 2, then 6 times 1, etc., etc. Now you'll see that if I wanted to write it as a times b, a is essentially increasing, b is decreasing, right? So if I had a factor, say, which was greater than n by 2, the other factor would have to be 1, which would mean the other factor trivial, which is not what we want. So it is enough to check till the floor of n by 2. So now, even if I make that optimization here, this is the largest, again, this is the largest prime that I can test it for. But there should be some difference, right? Because we've reduced the range of our checking essentially to half. So what we can do is just look at how much time it's taking to compute. So if I had percentage time here, so it says the wall time, I mean, the end-to-end time is essentially 7.87 microseconds. But if I try this out for this function here, you'll see that it's reduced. It's not much, but yeah, it's reduced for sure. It's around 6 microseconds here. One thing to note is that since we're not running it on a pure terminal, these wall times might differ a little because it goes through the terminal that I'm running here, and then it comes to the notebook that we're using here as a GUI thing. So since we're measuring in microseconds, even that matters. Okay, so that is done. And next, like Ameya said, we can also optimize it to just check it till the square root of n. Again, it's the same logic. Just a is decreasing and then the b is increasing. So if at all there's some factor that's greater than say root of n, we would have already checked its complement in the other half of the set. So I can run that as well. So this is the third iteration that we're making, and we can already test this prime that Clausen found out in, I think, 1855. Yeah. So if I just copy and paste the number here, you'll see that it takes some time, but it does return a value. Now, if I want to check how much time it's taking, so it's 7.39 seconds, which is still better than the other two because the other two functions weren't even running before killing my birthday. So this is some significant growth. So if you want to talk in terms of time complexity, we've reduced it to, when we started with O by n, O of n, and went to O of n by 2, and now it's straight O of square root of n. So we've reduced it quite a lot. Okay, so now you would have noticed that, I mean, it's pretty easy to see that checking if my number is even or odd is pretty easy. You just look at the last digit and then you can check if it's even or odd. Now we know that every even number that is not 2 is obviously not a prime because then 2 becomes a factor. So what we can do is, since that is easier to do, we could only look at, mean, factoring 2 out becomes very easy.
Kanak,
Yes, sir.
before going, actually you told root n, we need to sufficient to check up 0 to root n, right?
Yes, sir.
2 to root n.
Yes, sir.
But actually no need to check, even it is sufficient to check only primes, right? Up to root n.
Yes, sir. I mean, as soon as there's an increment in my list, I just break out of the loop. So I don't have to check throughout n all the time, square root of n all the time.
No, that is okay. What is that? I want to say that it is sufficient to check only primes up to root n. See, if a number is composite, then it has a prime factor less than or equal to root n. That we proved in the class also.
Yes, sir.
You are actually taking all the numbers from that, and so I think we can compute up to root n all the primes, and we'll check. If one of them is dividing, it is no need to check all the number. That's what I'm saying. Okay then. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Okay. Oh, so, like I was saying, you can, in case of even numbers, you can just keep factoring 2 out every time.
Right.
Till you have some 2 raised to k times some odd number. Right. So this is what Fermat's line of thought was essentially. So what he said was, if I'm starting with some integer, if it's less than 0, its factors will be just -1, and then all the factors of -n. If it's 0, we really don't have to care, because then every integer becomes a factor. So what we're essentially looking at is cases where n is greater than 0. Even there, if n is even, what you can do is keep factoring 2 out till you're left with some 2 raised to k times 2k plus 1. I mean, this should be k dash, I'm sorry. Yeah. So once we're done with that, so this factor of n becomes just the collection of those 2's, 2 raised to k, and then we take the union with the odd part of it, the odd factor of it. Now, here is where Fermat says, I mean, his idea was that every odd integer can be expressed as a difference of 2 squares. Now, can anyone tell me why this is true for every odd integer? So if I have some odd integer, what are the 2 squares that I can fill here? One thing to note is that n will be odd here. So
Mahima has to tell. Mahima proved it. Mahima, are you there? N plus 1 by 2 whole square minus n minus 1 by 2 whole square.
So
someone want to say something? Okay, before that, Kanak, I asking different question.
yes, sir.
So these slides, this is slide actually, right?
Yes, sir.
Is it you take a convert into image file and you put as a PNG or something here, or how you done it?
No, sir, I've used this library. It's called Tix.
Okay, no, that you done by using Tix. It is clear. Very good, actually. That is, but you are putting in this in the journal, right?
Yes, sir. So in TechMaker, I just created this PDF. Then I imported this in Journal.
But imported is okay. But so you imported everything. All slides imported, right?
Yes, sir.
Can you go to previous one? That is also slide. Okay, all are slides. Okay, no problem. There, yeah, okay. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
So even in the worst case, and I'll define what worst case is, you can write this odd integer like this, essentially as a sum of, a difference of 2 squares. So now one advantage of doing this is, you can factor x square minus y square as x plus y and x minus y. Right. So we've essentially gotten 2 factors of n. Now the problem is whether these 2 will be trivial or not. So in the case where, like we'll see with an example, if even one of them is 1, the other one has to be n, and that will deem my n to be a prime number. So this can act as an algorithm for checking prime numbers. So let's just quickly attack this problem with an example. So this is a very trivial example. I've already written a code to compute it for bigger numbers, but so the idea is to find the factors of say 15. So the idea is to write it as x square minus y square. Now what we can do is we can rewrite this as y square is x square minus 15. Now since we have a square here, obviously this should be greater than 0. So what we're doing is essentially bracketing 15 between say x square and, sorry for the bad notation, I think it should be some basically I square and I dash square, right? This is what we're doing here essentially. So since we have 15 here, can anybody bracket this? So can anyone give me what this I dash is going to be? The least I dash for which this holds, this part of the inequality.
16.
I'm assuming someone said 4. I couldn't hear the other person. So if I write this as 4, you can just see that it will be 4 square minus 15, which is 16 minus 15. And this essentially admits that y be a proper integer, right? So we'll keep repeating this process, and we'll start from this bracketing term that we've gotten. And like we saw before, we'll go up to n minus 1 by 2, right? So in that range, whatever value that deems y to be a proper integer, I can take that value. For instance, here I'm getting y, so my factors will become 4 minus 1 and 4 plus 1. So which is 3 and 5, which is what the factors of 15 are. So let's just quickly run code that I've written for that as well. So now there's a problem with this code here. It's not very easy to point out at the first stage, just by looking at it. But still, can anyone guess what the hint is that this Fermat factor of n that we've defined, this, even though it looks like a better option than the previous ones, it can still only compute this prime right here, 131071. Sorry. Yeah. Can anybody think of why that could be the case? Okay. So we've seen this in our SageMath course before. What happens is essentially taking the square root of some number, even though it looks like a simple operation, is computationally a little bit expensive. So for instance, in the trial division case, what I could do was compute the square root of n just one single time and then store it as some value, so that in this range I don't have to keep finding what the square root of n is, right, in that range. So it was 2 to this whatever range that I was defining. That is something I cannot do here. So for in this range, lower to say upper, and we already spoke about what that was, I have to keep checking if y is an integer. And for that, I have to keep taking the square root to check if that is an integer, which makes this a little computationally expensive. So if we're lucky and say in the second or the third step of this range that we're checking, we already strike some value that deems y to be an integer, it's good to go. But if not, and if it has to check for every, till the last step, which is usually the case for primes, this method actually takes a lot more time and it's computationally very expensive. So for instance, if I just look at how much time it's taking here, it's taking 7.15 seconds. But our trial division, the iteration that we made, it could already test for a way bigger number in just roughly the same amount of time. So that is one drawback of Fermat factors. Okay, so this is one last algorithm that I want to cover here for primality testing. So the idea is a little tricky, but let's try to.
Kanak, I want to point out here.
Yes, sir.
So you are telling primality testing. See, try to understand this part. There are two type of tests actually. One is primality testing, another is factorization method.
Yes, sir.
So of course they are connected, but they are completely different. Okay. What is it I want to convey to you is that primality testing, luckily now we have polynomial time algorithm.
Yes, sir.
That means, so there is a person from IIT Kanpur. Okay. So Manindra Agarwal and his students Kyle and Saxena, they given the polynomial time algorithm. So given a number, whether it is a prime or not.
Yes, sir.
But given a number, what are its factors? So how to completely factorize it? That is not, we do not have still algorithm.
Yes, sir.
Okay. For example, the method we are doing, this is very old method. One is that, but all algorithms are developed from here only. Which one? The Fermat factorization method.
Yes, sir.
Pollard row method. Then next semester, I think you may take that also maybe. That by using elliptic curves, elliptic curve will do the factorization.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So later there is other method that numerical sieve methods. They are called sieve methods. Okay. So that is a very big area now. Number theory, sieve methods are playing important role. So, but still, it is not. So, given a number, we don't know how to factor completely. Okay.
Right.
So that is still not polynomial time algorithm. Yeah. Okay. So these two are different. That's what I want to say. Yeah. Okay. Please go ahead.
Uh, so let's look at this one last method. So some of the ideas that sir was talking about using polynomials or sum n, etc., will be starting with those ideas here at least. So what we want to do is given a number n, we want to write it as some p times q. Now we make this a little more concrete. What we want to do is get some p which is a prime number, and two, like we've already seen, is not too much to ask. It should be less than square root of n, strictly less than square root of n, right? Okay. Now this might seem a little abstract, but here is what we do. We consider this modulo integer ring Zn, right? And then from this, for some given L, some fixed length L, we'll discuss what this L is and how it comes, etc. You just randomly pick elements from Zn, say some x1, x2, so on and so forth up to xl. Now what I'm assuming here is, so this is, say, assumption number one, is that each one of these xi's are distinct, right? And we'll verify each one of these. I mean, we'll come to each one of these assumptions again. And then in this set, what I'm doing is I'm looking at, say, xi and xj such that both of them are congruent modulo p. So we've not even started and we've already run into two major problems. One is that I'm assuming that these xi's are distinct, and two is that I'm testing for a condition that depends on p when I don't really know what p is, right? But we'll come to both of these problems in a short while. So here is what we do. Now what I can do is write this as xi minus xj is congruent to 0 mod p, and then by the definition of congruences, this is just that p divides xi minus xj, right? And then by our hypothesis here, we also know that p divides n, right? So combining both of these things, can somebody tell me something about the GCD of xi minus xj and n? So we have this, and we have this as well. So what can I say is going to divide the GCD of xi minus xj
Yeah,
and
so
n?
P divides it, at least P GCD greater than or equal to P.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
P divides it. Yeah.
So does anyone see how this helps us? So we started with xi's that were distinct, right? So xi will obviously be not equal to xj, that is 1. And we have a number that is dividing n. So we've, in some sense, found a non-trivial factor of n, right? So the GCD of xi minus xj comma n, this will be a non-trivial factor of n. Now let's come to these problems one by one. The first one being, I don't know what mod p is. So what I can do for that is, in some fixed length here that I'm fixing, I can just test for every range, right? So if I have, say, x1, so on and so forth up to xl, and then again I have the same set, right? So this is the same as running 2 for loops essentially, as we'll see. So whenever the index is not equal, I just I just take the difference and compute the GCD with n, right? That is one thing I can do. But we'll see when this has some problems. The other one is that xi's are distinct. So this runs into a problem of probability essentially. So from Zn, what is the probability that I'll pick one specific number? It's going to be 1 by n. Next, what is the probability that I'll pick exactly 2 numbers? It's going to be 2 by n. But what we're interested in, and so on and so forth. But what we're interested in is the probability that all of them will be distinct. So it's essentially a complement of each one of those events. So I just remove 1 minus each one of those, right? Now here is a neat little trick. What you can do is you can say that 1 minus y for some y in R is always less than or equal to e raised to minus y, right? So this probability that we were computing essentially boils down to the product of e raised to minus 1 by n, e raised to minus 2 by n, so on and so forth, right? And this will obviously go up to minus of L minus 1 by n, right? Now I can just add all of these up and I'll get e raised to minus L minus 1 by 2n. Now if in some sense I can just approximate this minus L into L minus 1 by L square. It's a very crude approximation, but I think it will work. So you have minus L square by 2n. This is the probability that we're starting with. N is obviously the number that we have, and L square was the choice. Now, even in the worst case, we want this probability to be at least 2/3, right? And why exactly 2/3 is because it's easy to substitute L as your root n and then cancel both of them out, and then you get e raised to minus half, which is very roughly equal to 2 by 3. You can actually verify that here. You can write EHP of minus 0.5. Right. And computationally, we can always afford something more than square root of L. That is never an issue. So, in fact, does this simulation, I mean, picking randomly and then computing some probability to define this length of our pick, does anyone recall what these methods are called? So we've done a lot of these methods in our statistics classes, especially in the last semester. Okay, they're called essentially Monte Carlo methods. So as a rule of thumb, this is very vaguely speaking, but anywhere where we're picking elements at random and then based on that defining the length of our selection, it's very loosely again, it's a Monte Carlo method. So this Pollard row method is essentially a class of Monte Carlo methods. So, okay, like we saw this L, it's enough to choose this as root of n. Okay, so now we've tackled both the problems, these two problems. But again, here what I said was you could consider the difference everywhere where the index is not equal. So now we're picking pairwise, right? So picking some I comma j, and we have say root n to begin with. So we again running into, I mean, I just take the seal here, root n, and we're choosing 2 every time. These many GCD computations, and that does not make it any better than the previous 3 algorithms that we ran here, right? So since we're looking for an optimization, there's one more neat trick. Now the reason behind this is a little complicated. I must admit, even I haven't understood it very clearly. But what you do is define this function from Zn to Zn and pick some polynomial, say x square plus 1, or say even x square minus 1 works. And you start with some initial guess, say x naught, right? So, and I define list where the first element would be x naught, then it will be f of x naught, and then I keep going recursively. So the third one would be f of x naught, so on and so forth, right? So the advantage of doing this is, like we'll see now, if I take the mod, I mean, if I look at how these values behave congruent to n, you'll see that it essentially runs into a cycle. Now, I haven't studied graph theory very well, but essentially, if I were to draw a directed cyclic graph, what would happen is if I would start with, say, x naught, go to x1, say x2, x3, x4, so on and so forth, but then eventually I would run into a circle, would eventually run into a loop. So starting with some x naught, x1, x3, so on and so forth, but then eventually I'll keep running in this circle. Now, why I keep running in this circle is because of this choice of f that I'm making. Now, how fast this circle occurs depends on the choice of our polynomial. Sometimes it may happen that the circle never even appears for very, very large iterations as well. So this I'm not sure how to choose the polynomial yet. The theory was a little complicated for me, so I skipped that. And now this cycle essentially looks like a row, right? Which is why the name Pollard row algorithm, Pollard row method. So I've done a very basic implementation of the same in SailMath here. So for instance, if you want to check for this number, it will give me the factors. But there are many numbers for which this polynomial doesn't work. So that is one problem. And this running into circle that I was talking about, if you don't want to get into graph theory, we can also visualize it using a scatter plot essentially. So I've taken 72 here because it's easier to plot. So if I just quickly look at, what the factors of 72 are. Okay, it's running into some issue. So you will see that it keeps jumping after it touches 14, right? So what I'm doing here in this program is essentially, as soon as I get that factor that I'm looking for, I'll break out of that loop. So very vaguely speaking, as soon as it detects some rhythm in this graph, right, some periodicity in this graph, it will break at the point where the rhythm started, right, and then deem that number to be a factor. So that is how the Pollard row method is actually working. It's a little complicated. It took me a while to understand this, but I'll share this PDF with you at the end, which explains it really well. Okay, so that is that. So now that we've covered primes, let's step back a little and try to delve into what are called these number theoretic functions, right? So we already know this already for this divisor function. It just returns all the divisors, including the trivial ones, 1 and 12. So we've seen this in our course already. So suppose I want to count the number of divisors. That function will be called tau of n. I could just return the length of this divisor function, right? Now I can use it to see how. Yeah. Now if I want the sum of these divisors, I could do that as well. that would define what's called a sigma function, right? Now coming to Mobius function. So like we've already seen, it requires me to test at one case particularly if that integer is square free or not. If it is, I'll return 0. If it's 1, I'll return 1, or I'll just return 1 raised to however many prime divisors of that number are, right? So here I just defined a basic function for square free, right? And then I call that function in this Mobius function here, right? So I also could have just defined this square free function here. It would amount to the same thing. But now I can check for any value here, and it will give me a return value. Okay, so those are some of the aspects that we've already covered in the course. Now I want to cover a few geometrical aspects of number theory. So they're not truly geometrical, but in some sense we can say that. So let's start with this plot. So what I'm doing is essentially considering this polar plot here, right? And then I'm plotting all the values n comma n, right? Such that n, I've defined the range of n, 1 to n, right? Evenly distributed. So for instance, if I plot 1 comma 1, essentially what it says that it will be a point at a distance 1 making an angle of radian 1 with this positive x-axis, right? I'm plotting all of those points. So let's quickly look at that. Okay, you will see that here it may not be that easy to see, but you get these spirals essentially, right? If I increase the size of my n, right, you can actually see those spirals here, right? These are what are called.
Can you repeat some of the beginning of prime spirals, what you are talking?
Yes, sir. So I'm not talking about prime spirals yet. This is the Euclidean spiral. So this is my polar plot.
Okay.
And then I'm plotting all points n comma n, such that n is a natural number essentially.
Okay.
So I've done that in some range, say from 1 to 500.
Okay.
So for instance, p comma p would just be a number that makes a distance of p from the origin, right, and makes an angle of p radians with the positive x-axis. So that is what I've done here. So you're getting these spirals, so to say. So these are what are called Euclidean. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name now. I think it is Euclidean spirals, not really. Archimedean spirals, yeah, sorry. So these are the spirals that you get. So now what I want to do is, instead of plotting all of these n comma n, I just want to plot it when it's p comma p, where p is a prime. So in some range, say 1 to 100, I'll only plot p comma p if p is a prime. So let's do that. So I'll comment this out. Right. Okay. So when I'm plotting, say for in a range 1 to 1000, this looks a little arbitrary. It looks very random, and we already know that nature of prime numbers is pretty random. So, but what happens if I increase this number? Say I plot 5000 of these, and in the range of 5000. So you'll see that even these are giving me some spirals. So let's increase them a little more to. Okay, you can actually see those spirals very well now. So, but the difference between these spirals and the ones we saw earlier, where I was plotting all n comma n, I wasn't getting these gaps in between, right? So that is one question to ask. So one question to ask is, why the gaps, right? That is one. And the second question I can ask is, even in each one of those bands, for instance, if I increase the size here, even in each one of those bands, I'm getting these gaps, right? So that is also something we want to understand, right? So that is the second question we want to ask. So to answer both of these questions, let's just zoom in a little. I'll only plot P comma P if P is in the range 1 to 50. Sure. And you'll see that I'm only plotting primes here. But if I comment out the primes and plot all the integers, I mean the non-primes as well. Yeah, here. So what is happening is you're getting a bunch of spirals. So I'm sorry. Yeah. So you'll need a couple of prerequisites for this. One is that the value of 6 pi, is very roughly equal to 2 pi, right? I mean, it falls short essentially.
Okay.
So, like this point here, you can see my cursor, right?
Yes, we can see.
So this one is going to be 6, this point here.
Hmm.
And now if I follow this spiral here, right, this one, I'm essentially plotting all the multiples of 6. So
Okay.
for instance, I'll be getting 6 and then 6 to the 12, so on and so forth, right? Now, what about the band above it? Can anyone guess what this band here is going to represent? So here I was starting with 6, and then the next n that I will choose is going to be 7, right? So for instance, you could say that this point is 7. So, and then this point is again 1 above. So the spiral right above it is 6k plus 1, right? So for instance, 7, and then 13, and so on and so forth. So there's one band corresponding to 6k. Then there's one band corresponding to 6k plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4, plus 5, right? So essentially what these bands are a nice representation of residue classes mod some integer 6. Okay. Now what's so special about this 6 is that, like I said, 6 is roughly equal to 2 pi. Now I could also take the approximation that we've been using since class 10, or maybe even earlier, that pi is equal to 22 by 7, right? This will make 2 pi the 44 by 7. So essentially, at the value 44, I would have completed roughly 7 turns. But this time, instead of undershooting, which I was doing in this case, I'll be overshooting, right? So now this was just another example for you to see. So as in when I better the approximation of pi using these p by q, so I'll plot p here. It will be very close to the x-axis. For instance, this is 44 here that I'm plotting, right? And so on and so forth. So now we've understood these bands here, right? Yes. So what is happening when I'm plotting just primes? One is that obviously 6k won't be plotted because each one of those numbers are not primes, right? And then 6k plus 2 also won't be plotted. 6k plus 3 also won't be plotted. 6k plus 4 also won't be plotted. So I'll be left with 6k plus 1 and 6k plus 5, which is exactly what we see. So if I comment out this and just plot the prime ones, you'll see that I get exactly 2 bands here. Right? So, and now the other question to ask was why are there some holes here? So what happens is there could be values in that class
that not
that, yes. So for instance, I could take 25. That won't be a prime, so I won't plot it here. So this gap that you see here is actually due to 25.
Okay.
So that explains the gaps. So just plot them together. Maybe gray out this one. Maybe light gray. Here, and that explains the whole plot that we're getting here essentially. Okay. Moving on, there's one other nice conjecture. This won't take long. So essentially the idea is this. You give me any number n. If it's even, I'll just divide it by n by 2. Now if the resulting number is even, again I'll divide it by n by 2, so on and so forth. But the moment it is an odd number, I take 3n plus 1. So for instance, if I start with something like 6, say, so 6 by 2 would be 3, and now 3 is odd, so 3 3s are 9 plus 1, 10, and then 10 is even, so 5, and so on and so forth. So what this conjecture says is that eventually this f of ai minus 1, it will converge to 1. Now the interesting deal is this, we call it a conjecture because it's still not proven. It looks like a fairly easy result, but no one has been able to give a concrete proof yet. But what we can still do is verify some properties of this f geometrically. So I verified one of those, in fact 2 of those. So let's just, so based on this definition, I've defined this Collat sequence here, right? So it will just return all the points in that sequence. So for instance, if I just take Collat of 10, it will give me how I go to that 1.
Okay.
Right?
Great.
So this is what it's doing. Now I want to check 2 things essentially. So let's start off by plotting this Collat sequence. So does anyone have any guesses what the plot will look like? It's a, it's a very anticlimactic plot, nothing too great. So if I start with n, for instance, so n comma n, I know that it has to somehow end up with 1 at 1 comma 1. So in between all of those points, it will again be some xi comma xi, right? So if I just plot it out, it's just going to be a straight line. So this plot doesn't really tell me much about how the sequence is behaving. So one thing that we can check is, in this sequence, what is the ratio of odd numbers in the sequence and even numbers in the sequence. So I just defined 2 simple counters here, odd counter, even counter, both of which are set to 0 initially. And every time a value in the sequence is even, I add 1 to the counter. Similarly for odd, right? So run this for this number here. Then if I look at the ratio of even to odd values, since I get 1.67. Now this is another slightly unverified result, and this ratio exactly doesn't hold, but looks like a rough approximation. So no matter what value I take here, it will roughly be equal to ln 3 by ln 2. So if I just look at this number, what it says is that there are more even numbers in the sequence than there are odd numbers, right? So now here is what I'm doing. So I'm considering the y-axis, and the sequence that I'm getting 1, it ends at 1, right? So what I do is I reverse this list. So I go from 1 and so forth to 5 to 10, and then end up at 6, right? I'm reverse engineering the list essentially. So I start at 1 comma 1, right? And every time it's an even number, I multiply it with, I rotate it essentially by some angle theta, right? And then every time it's odd again, it gets rotated again, so on and so forth. So now if there are actually more even numbers than the odd numbers in my sequence, this tree that I'm getting essentially would be bent a little more to the x-axis, or the positive x-axis. And if the other way around, it would be tilted a little more towards the negative x-axis. So you can actually see a tree here. Here I've taken n to be 100. Sorry, I didn't run this one. Now if I plot this out, you'll actually see that it's bent a lot more towards the positive x-axis, right? Which verifies that claim.
Right.
So what you can do is essentially try this out for different values of n, and then stack the plot over each other, and you get a very nice tree, essentially tree-looking structure.
Okay.
So this is the last thing that I've covered for today, that I'm going to cover for today. So one of my classmates also covered what's called Pythagorean triples, right? So it's a square plus b square equal to c square. This situation here. So what I've done is, for this Pythagorean triple, right, I've just plotted the legs of this Pythagorean triple out. But I've not only considered positive values, I've also considered negative values. Now, why I've done that will be clear very soon. So in this arbitrary range, I'm just plotting the function out, and you get this nice plot here. So let's try to interpret this plot. Yeah, so essentially what is happening is, in my graph here, if I have some triple, the legs of some triple AB here, it's also plotting all, it's also giving me a line that passes through AB, right? You can call it an arm of AB, for instance. So I can verify this for AB, that is easy. But can someone tell me why I'm getting this line corresponding to AB? I think one of them also verified this property in class. I'm running out of time, I'll just explain it quickly. So for every AB, I can also look at KA, KAB, right? And even this will be a triple, like we verified. So for every primitive triple, legs of the primitive triple AB, even KA, KB will give me will form the legs of some triple. Yes. Which is why I'm getting these lines that are originating from the origin. One last property is that you can sort of see these parabolic patterns here, right? These patterns here. Mm. So I discussed this with Vikram sir in my seminar course as well, where we're talking about conformal maps. Mm. So what happens is, I'm sorry. Yeah. So here, this is just a n cross n mesh, right? Mm. And the map that I'm looking at is Z square, which is essentially also somehow related to this Pythagorean triple map, right?
Right.
So you can actually see the mesh getting deformed in this shape here. That's very similar to my contact system.
Very good.
Yeah. So
no. How are you able to see these two? Means when do you get idea actually?
Sir, when Amaya was presenting during.
Okay. Well, that is okay. There, that picture you saw there. This picture you got separately. So you who connected? Means it is already available in the literature, or you guessed or something?
No, sir. It is coincidentally.
Oh, that's what. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Okay.
Because I'm studying conformal maps with my seminar. So.
Right.
So yeah, that pretty much concludes my presentation. These are some of the references that I've used. So I recommend everyone watch these two videos, especially 4 and 5. He's explained it in a much better way than I have. So this guy is the one who runs this channel called 3 Blue 1 Brown. So he's explained both of these concepts very well there.
Correct.
And yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Yeah. So.
So
yeah,
just give me a second.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about finite continued fraction. Before that, we see what is simple finite continued fraction. So it is an expression of form a0 plus 1 upon a1 plus 1 upon a2 plus 1 and so on, where a0 is an integer and it is positive, negative or zero integer, and these a1, a2 and so on are the positive integers. Now this expression look like tedious, so we write this expression in this form, like bracket a0, a1, a2 up to so on. Now if we terminate at some step, if we terminate this as some step, then we call it as finite continued fraction. So we get this form a0 plus 1 upon a1 plus 1 upon a2 plus 1 up to so on an minus 1 plus 1 upon an, where similarly here a0 is an integer with a positive and negative value, and a1, a2, a3 up to an are the positive integers. Now we note that here this a1, a2, an, sorry, a1, a2, an are called as partial quotient of the simple continued fraction, and we use a bracket a0, a1 up to an to represent this finite simple continued fraction. There are other ways to write these continued fractions. Are first is a0, a1 up to an minus 1 plus an. Since we have this continued fraction, we can write the last term an as an minus 1 plus 1 upon an. And the second one is we have a0 plus 1 upon continued fraction a1, a2 up to n. We have this continued fraction a0 plus a0 plus 1 upon a1 plus 1 upon a2 plus 1 upon a3 up to so on 1 upon an. So we can write it as a0 plus 1 upon, if we take this part only, so we get a1 comma a2 comma up to an. So we can write it in this form. So now let's do one computation of finite simple continued fraction. So finite continued finite simple continued fraction for rational number has a strong connection with Euclidean algorithm. So we have here 415 by 93. So first we use Euclidean algorithm. Then we get 415 is 4 times of 93 plus 43. Then then you divide 93 by 43. Then you get 93 is 2 times 43 plus 7. Then we divide 43 by 7. We get 43 is 6 times 7 plus 1. And last we get 7 is 7 times 1 plus 0. And now we want to write it in the rational form. So we have 415 divided by 93. So if we look at here and we divide this term by 93, we get 415 by 93 equal to 4 plus 43 by 93. And since we want this form, we want in this form, so we write it as 4 plus 1 by 93 by 43. Now 93 by 43 we can compute from here. We can divide this term by 43. So we get 93 by 43 as 2 plus 7 by 43. Next, again we wrote this in this form, like 2 plus 1 upon 43 by 7, and 43 by 7 again we divide this 43 by 7, we get 43 by 7 equal to 6 plus 6 plus 1 upon 7. And now you can see we cannot divide further. So we get our finite continued fraction, that is 4, 2, 6, 7. So note that these are also the connection of, if we see this, we get the continued fraction is 4, 2, 6, 7. And if we look at the Euclidean algorithm, we get the same terms in this Euclidean algorithm. So this, so here we can conclude that Euclidean algorithm have connection with this coefficient, like continued fraction. So Euclidean algorithm, you can Okay. So this is how you can compute the continued fraction for rational number. So there are some results for rational number. First is every rational number can be written as finite simple continued fraction. So let x be let x be a rational number. So rational number of form a by b, and where b is not 0. Without loss of generality, we take b is greater than 0. And now recall the extended Euclidean algorithm. We know that R0 is A and R1 is B. By Euclidean algorithm, we get R0 equal to R1 Q1 plus R2, where R2 is greater than R1 and less than 0. Next we get it R1 equal to R2 Q2 plus R3, where R3 is greater than R3 is less than R2 and greater than 0, and so on and so on, and we keep on going until we get Rn minus 2 equal to Rn minus 1 times Qn minus 1 plus Rn, where Rn minus 1 is less than Rn minus 2 and greater than 0. And the last term we get is Rn minus 1 equal to Rn times Qn, where we do not get any reminder here, and note that here all these Q1, Q2, Q3 up to Qn all are positive. Now we will find the value of we will find the value of A by B from this Euclidean algorithm. So if we know A by B is nothing but R0 R0 upon R1. We have already assumed that here. So if we divide R0 R0 by R1, so we get R0 by R1 equal to Q1 plus R2 by R1. So we write it here, and we want in this form. So we just write Q1 plus 1 upon R1 by R2, and R1 by R2 can be found from this equation. If we divide this equation by R2, we get Q2 plus R2, R1 by R2 equal to Q2 plus R2 by R3. Again, we write in this form like Q1 plus 1 upon Q2 plus 1 upon R3 upon R2. And we keep on doing this. Then the last we get Q1 plus 1 upon Q2 plus 1 upon Q3 plus 1 upon so on up to 1 upon Qn. So we get the form, we get A by B as Q1 plus 1 upon Q2 plus 1 upon Q3 plus 1 upon so on 1 upon Qn. So this is the continued fraction we get. So this is how we can find out continued fraction for a rational number. The next result is every finite simple continued fraction represent a rational number. So we assume a finite simple continued fraction, this continued fraction, and we will do the proof by induction method. When we have n equal to 1, we have a0 and a1, which is nothing but a0 plus 1 upon a1. And if we solve, we get a0 a1 plus 1 upon a1. Since we know it is a simple continued fraction, so a1 and a2 belong to integers, and a1 is greater than 0, a1 is positive. So if we from here we can conclude that a0 a1 plus 1 upon a1, it is a rational number. So for n equal to 1, our result is true. Next we assume that it is true for n equal to k. So we get our continued sample fraction a0 a1 up to an is belong to rational number. So we assume here it is true. Next we take n equal to k plus 1. So continued fraction a0 a1 a2 up to a k plus 1, we can write it in this form
Yeah, this is
uh,
fine.
as
Yeah,
said,
this is okay.
yes, sir.
I think this is okay. No need to
Oh.
explain.
Okay. So we can say that if one integer is added to a rational number, we can get the rational number only. So by induction, by mathematical induction method, we said that a0, a1, a2 up to an is a rational number.
Right.
Yeah. So here is a note. If I have a form a by b and my b is greater than a and my b is positive, then we get a form like this,
You tell me
0
one.
comma. Yes, sir.
You tell me one thing. So you know real numbers, right?
Yes.
The real numbers actually union of rational numbers and irrational numbers.
Yes.
How do you check given number is rational or not? Say if
How
I
I
give
check?
real number,
Huh.
I want to check whether it is a rational or irrational, right? Question is
Huh.
clear. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
right. How do you check it?
Just 2 minutes.
Yeah, so one method is that it is in the P by Q form or not.
Oh, yes, sir.
P by Q where P and Q are integers and Q not equal to 0, then it is rational, otherwise it is irrational.
Yes, sir.
But a given number writing that is we don't know properly, right?
Huh.
But if you, for example, 10 by 3, we'll go for a decimal expansion, right?
Yes.
And the decimal expansion 10 by 3 means what? 3.333 like, right?
Yeah.
The another approach is that in the decimal expansion, the decimal that either recurring or terminating.
Yes.
For example, what is 2 by 5 value? Two by 5,
It is 0.4.
0.4. So that is terminating.
Yes.
In the decimal expansion, either terminates or repeats, then we'll say that that is a again rational number, right?
Okay. Yes, yes.
Uh, uh, but again, that is also difficult. Means that method. Okay, so either terminate or repeats or something. Yeah. But whereas other aspect is that again these in the irrational numbers. So there is a numbers called algebraic numbers and transcendental numbers, right?
Yes, sir.
How do you check a given number is transcendental or what do you mean by algebraic number? You have any idea? Okay, algebraic means that it satisfies some polynomial.
Okay.
For example, root 2 is rational or irrational?
It is irrational.
Irrational, but it satisfies a polynomial with integer quotients or even rational coefficients, right?
Huh.
X square minus 2. Right?
Yes, sir.
They are called transcendental numbers. Okay, transcendental and like that. So there is not a clear-cut criteria. But whereas if you come to continued fractions, how do you check a given number is so every real number I can write as a continued fraction.
Huh.
So given number, real number, assume I computed a continued fraction. Then from that, how do you conclude a number is rational or irrational? Is my question clear? You can forget about whatever I discussed till now. I'm now asking. I gave a real number, computed a continued fraction for it, and I want to check now it is rational or irrational by looking the continued fraction. Any idea?
Wait, sir.
What is it you proved till now? You proved that if I take a rational number
Yes.
by Euclidean algorithm and all, what you completed at the end.
It is form of continued fraction.
Not only that, you told something else. If it is a rational number, You proved something. Okay. What is the second result you proved? If you take a finite continued fraction, then what you,
Then it represents rational number.
yeah. So if it is a rational number, then what you proved in the before that?
If it is rational number, then it is a form of finite continued fraction.
So what is that you concluded now? A number is a rational number if and only if
We have a finite continued fraction.
that is in fact simple continued, finite simple continued
Yeah.
fraction. Correct?
Yes.
That is the beauty of these continued fractions. Continued fractions are very beautiful that by looking continued fraction, if it is finite, it is rational. It is otherwise it is irrational. So very clear cut criteria. That is what you achieved till now. So a number is rational or irrational depending upon the number of terms in the continued fraction. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead now.
So if we have a by b, if we have this form a by b and b is greater than a and positive, then we have continued fraction in this form. So example, we have 3 by 4. We can write it as 0 plus 1 by 4 by 3. Then 4 by 3 can be written as 1 plus 1 by 3. So we get the continued fraction as 0, 1, 3.
So why you stopped at here only? Why not you are continuing?
Because we can't, if we continue, then we get an infinite form and we are doing the finite simple continued fraction.
No, that is not the thing. So you see when you are doing
Mhm.
4 by 3, you are again done one more time.
Yes.
But 1 by 3 comes, you are not done. Why it is? Yeah, that you need to understand. Where to stop. Okay. Yeah, you need to study that again. Okay, go ahead.
So next we have is the finite simple continued fraction for rational number is unique. So the answer is no. So if the idea is if you can write the last term as an equal to an minus 1 plus 1 upon 1. So you can have this representation for rational number. So if we can see that from here, we can see that a naught plus a1 plus a2 up to an, we can write it as a naught a1 a2 up to an minus 1 comma an minus 1 comma 1 whenever an is greater than 1. So we already have done this example. We take this example. 415 divided by 93 equal, we get this continued fraction as 267. We write it in this form 4 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 6 plus 1 upon 7. And now I can write this 1 upon 7 as 1 4 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 6 plus 1 upon 7 as 6 plus 1. So we get here 42661. In general, if you have a or continued fraction a naught a1 up to an, we can then you can always take the last term and write it as an minus 1 comma 1 because because an is same as an minus 1, so we can
Provided n is greater than 1.
when n is greater than 1. So we can write it as an minus 1, an plus 1 and minus 1.
Yeah, that's
So next we have the kth conversion. If we have a continued fraction and we cutting off and we cut off the expansion after the kth term, then we get the kth ak as a kth conversion. So and it is given by ck. So
one
if we
point.
have
One point. Actually, many times when you are writing a0 comma a1 comma a2 comma डॉट 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 के बाद और एक कामा चाहिए. ओके ना?
yes, sir.
So entire this write-up, you are not putting that. Yeah, the next time onwards, we write down. Huh? Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So it is denoted as CK, and so we can write it CK equal to A naught A1 up to comma up to AK. So if we take K equal to 0, then C naught is A naught. If we take K equal to 1, then my C1 is A1. My first first term is A1 and A2. If we take K equal to 2, then C2 is A1, A naught, A1, A2, and so on. So next is the kth convergent of any continued fraction is usually denoted by Pk by Qk, where Pk and Qk are integers. For continued fraction, A naught, A1 up to An, we can then C naught is given as P naught upon Q naught, but C naught is, we know C naught is A naught. So we can write A naught upon A1. Then from here we get the value of P naught as A naught and Q naught as 1. Similarly, we write the C1 is P1 upon Q1, but C1 is A naught and A1. A naught and A1, we can write it as A naught plus 1 upon A1. And if we solve, we get A naught A1 plus 1 upon A1. Then we get the value of P1 is A naught A1 plus 1 and Q1 is A1.
Very good. Yeah.
Next, we get C2 equal to P2 by Q2. Similarly, we know the value of C2 is A naught, A1, A2. Then we write it in continued rational form. Then we get, and if we solve this, we get the value A2 P1 plus P naught. A2 P1 plus P naught upon A2 Q1 plus Q2. So we get P2 as A2 P1 plus P2 and Q2 A2 Q1 plus Q2 and so on. Now from this kth conversion, we have theorem. The kth convergent of simple continued fraction A naught A1 up to An has value Ck equal to Pk upon Qk. For k is less than equal to n and greater than equal to 0. Since we have already proved for k equal to 1.
No, actually, see, till now that particular thing you explained very nicely, but suddenly your theorem is not clear. Okay, go back.
Okay.
Go back.
Yes.
No, little go back. So you are explaining that C naught equal to P1 by P0 by Q0. P0 is equal to A0 and Q1 equal to 1. पहले आपने किया ना?
Yes.
And are you assuming A naught is also positive?
No, sir. It may be positive, it may be negative. I have already told that.
Yeah, that you told. Yes, I know. But again, I'm asking one more time. Fine, good. So C1 is equal to now P1 by Q1. So you got P1 value and Q1 value, right?
Yes, sir.
But here itself, P1 is equal to, can you express in terms of P0?
Here, now, A naught P0 plus 1. Yes, sir.
No. Tell me P1 equal to.
No, I didn't use it.
No, P0 equal to A0, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me P1 equal to?
P1 equal to A1 P0 plus 1.
Very good. So Q1 equal to A1 only, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, now go to P2. So P2 already you wrote A2 into P1 plus P0, right?
Yes, sir.
So what is P0? P0 is A0. Can you go above again one more time?
Yes.
Yeah. So 1, okay. So P1 is A0, A1 plus 1. Whereas P2 equal to A1 P1 plus A0, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What is the next one? P3 value. Now go below somewhere.
P3 value will be A3 P2 plus P1.
Okay. What is Q3 value?
Sorry?
Q3.
Q3 is A3 Q2 plus Q1.
Okay. So why you are doing all these things? Why you are computing these values?
Actually, we have to use
No, no,
that values here, no? So,
no, no,
sorry.
why you are computing these values? So these values, PA values, they are coming how? So in order to get P1, what is that I need to know?
We are getting this value from the continued fraction.
No. In order to get P1, what is P0? P0 is A0.
Yes.
Q1 is, Q0 is 1.
Q0 is 1, right?
Yeah. So see, you are given continued fraction. You are given continued fraction. Your goal is to compute the convergence.
Yes.
Okay, again, go back slowly. So today also we are discussing algorithms and all. So it is right time to discuss. So you given a continued fraction and you want to compute the convergence. Okay, convergence means what? Kth convergent is that you add up to that extent. You
Yes.
truncate the continued fraction, correct?
Yes.
But that is a little cumbersome, very difficult. Means once I give a continued fraction every time in order to compute CK, so I want to compute the continued fraction A0 plus 1 by like that, all I need to compute, right?
Yes. Yes.
But what is that you are doing? You are giving an algorithm. So no need to do all those things. I will CK equal to PK by QK, right?
Okay.
And
Yes.
I want now I'll compute now in order to compute CK, I want to compute PK and QK.
Yes.
How do I compute PK? So PK computed from, so first I'll compute P0, but P0 is A0 and that is taken. And Q1 is equal, Q0 is equal to 1. That is also fixed.
Yes.
So C0 is very easy. And so C0 is simply A0 only, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm truncating there itself. I'm not looking. So P0, Q0 is easy. So C0 also easy. That is in fact A0. But now C1 value is actually computation is that I'll compute directly from the continued fraction, that is A0 plus 1 by A1. First few terms are easy. Directly I can compute from the continued fraction itself, right?
Yes.
But I am converting these into PIs and QIs, right? Yeah.
Yes,
So
sir.
what is now P1 value? P1 is equal to P0 into A1, A1 into P0 plus 1.
Yes.
So now go there, P2 value, and again go to P2 value one time so that it will be clear. Yeah, P2 equal to A2 into P1 plus P0, Q2 is equal to A2 into Q1 plus Q0.
Yes.
So you told that what is P3? Can you repeat one more time?
A3, P2 plus P1.
Okay. What is Q3 value?
A3, Q2 plus Q1.
What is P4 value?
A4, you said Q4, right?
Yeah, P4 and Q4 now.
Okay, P4 is A4,
Hmm.
P3 plus P2.
Very good. What is Q4 value?
A4, Q4, Q3 plus Q2.
Very good. So, so what is happening now? I can write a program. I can give the values of P0 and Q0, and I already give the continued fraction. So, what are the inputs here? I have continued fraction. My goal is to compute the convergence.
Yes.
So, but to compute convergence, I'm telling that actually I'll compute only PIs and QIs, P1, P0, P1, P2, P3, and so on, Q0, Q1, Q2, and so on. Now, whatever the convergent you ask me, I'll simply do kth convergent means PK by QK.
Yes.
These P's and Q's are constructed recursively.
Okay.
That is called recursively. So, we are computing the convergence. So this is a method to compute convergence. So by using PAs and QJs, which is okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that we can write a program or recursively very different. Yeah, please go ahead now.
Okay, so the theorem is convergent of simple continuous fraction A0, A1 up to AN has a value CK equal to PK upon QK. For K is less than equal to n and greater than equal to 0. We will do this by induction method. For k equal to 1, we have already proved that C1 equal to P1 upon Q1. We get this. So result is,
Yeah, you can exclude this theorem.
yeah.
So you
Okay.
tell me what are the properties of this continued these convergence. You are discussing those. Are you
Yes,
dis-
sir.
just
This
state them. Do not prove it. State them first.
property,
Yeah, this is one property. These are
yeah.
properties of P's and Q's. So Pk Qk minus 1 minus Pk minus 1 Qk is equal to minus 1 whole power k minus 1. That is, if you take that as a matrix, so determinant is, these are unimodular matrices. Okay, this is one result. What is the next result?
I have done this only, sir.
Oh, but you need to do main thing, that the continued that convergence, right?
Yes, sir.
The convergence, actually, that is one of the interesting point. Okay,
Yes.
in particular, you take Fibonacci numbers,
Okay.
and for example 54 by 30, 55 by 34, 55 by 34.
Huh.
Are you following? You
Yes,
take
sir.
you take a fraction 55 by 34. 55 is and 34 are Fibonacci numbers. Okay,
Yes, sir.
so you compute the you compute the first. What you compute? You compute the continued fraction first. For which one?
55 by 34.
Very good, and you understood very much clear. Okay, good. Then you have a continued fraction. Then afterwards you'll compute the convergence.
Okay.
Now the convergence becomes uh, so very beautifully they come odd terms and even terms. Okay, even
Huh.
terms are increasing, odd terms are decreasing, but all of them very beautiful properties will come. Okay,
Yes,
that
sir.
that those things we need to study. So that will help you. Actually, you draw the plot of that and all. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So try to read them and then we'll after that it will look over. Okay. Just
Okay.
not stop here. So
Yes,
your
yes.
goal is to study the convergence, even convergence, odd convergence. So you need to prove that this convergence actually converges. See
Yes.
C0, C1, C2, C3 and all, right? C0,
Yes.
C1, C2, C3 and so on. So this is a sequence now,
Yes.
and they will converge. And but again, so how to prove this is convergent, right? So to prove this is convergent, but interesting point is that they will go up and down. They will not increasing sequence or decreasing sequence. See, you know that increasing sequence bounded above,
Yes.
increasing sequence bounded above converges, or decreasing sequence bounded below converges. But this sequence is increasing or decreasing, but it is bounded above. So in this case, how do you prove? You will take even terms and you will take, that means subsequence with even terms, subsequence with odd terms, and they will converge. And both, if both subsequence are converging, even terms and odd terms, then original sequence also converges. So like that, there are beautiful things, analysis and number theory here.
Okay.
So that you need to understand. So then it will be complete actually. So finite continued fractions are simple, means you are, first thing you are pointing out is that every rational number is a finite continued fraction. Every finite continued fraction is a rational number. That is one point.
Yes.
Second point is that now coming to the convergence now. So just giving convergence is not sufficient. You need to know something about the convergence. Why actually I need to study convergence, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, yes. Okay, good.
I'll cover that in Monday's lecture. Is that okay?
No, no, you don't need to now tell. So topic is done. Okay. But yeah, you keep ready and come if possible for you. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, good. Yeah. So, but yeah, you studied several things. That is a good thing to note. Yeah, we'll stop here. Okay.
Sir, I have take this example.
Okay, take it. Yeah.
Yeah, if we have example using the convergent, we have to evaluate this continued fraction. We know P naught, P1 and Pk and Q1, Q naught, Q1 and Qk. So we make a table K with the with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and AK, PK and QK. We just substitute these and then we calculate these values. And after calculating this value, we have to evaluate this continued fraction. So this continued fraction, we can write it as C form of Ck equal to Pk by Qk. Since we have here C4, we can find out P4 upon Q4, and the value of P4 is minus 263 and Q4 is 103. So we get the conversion is minus 263 upon 103. Yeah, that's it.
No, 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 not that's it. Just wait here. Go below. So what is P0 Q0 and what is P1 Q1?
What is P0? P0 is A0 and Q0 is 1.
Okay, but in the table now, already table.
In table, my P0 is minus 3 and Q0 is 1.
Okay, P1 Q1.
P1 Q1 is minus, P1 is minus 5 and Q2 is minus 2.
Okay, let us assume that it is a matrix. Minus 3, 1 is the first column and minus 5, 2 is the second column.
Okay.
2 by 2 matrix. What is the determinant of that?
Determinant.
Minus 3 into 2. I am telling that this is
minus 6 plus. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm telling that 2 by 2 matrix. Determinant is minus 1. Okay, good.
Yes.
Now look at that P1 Q1 and P2 Q2. Take a 2 by 2 matrix.
P1 and Q2.
P1 Q1, P2 Q2. So that minus 5, 2 is the first column, minus 23, 9, second column.
Okay.
2 by 2 matrix again. What is the determinant of this?
So this is minus 45 plus 46. 1.
1. Okay. Now look at this part. Minus 23, 9 and minus 120, 47. Right?
Minus 23.
Minus 23 into 47. Right? What is 23 into 47?
What?
No, I'll tell you. Look, don't worry. 23 into 47, I think
1081.
1081. Yeah, minus 1081 and that one?
120.
Minus
120.
Into 9. Right?
That is minus 1080.
So what is the answer now?
Answer is minus 1.
So are you done this theorem today? I'm finding
sir.
you are not done. Can you go up? What is this theorem says? This result says. You look at here.
This is if we have PK, QK minus 1 and PK minus 1, QK.
No, let us take K equal to 1, right? First. K equal to 1, okay? K equal to 1, then what is that? We get to P1.
Q0 minus P0 Q1.
That is exactly the determinant, right?
Yes.
You are getting minus 1 whole power. So K equal to 1. So you got minus 1 there. Okay.
Yes.
So exactly that time asked. Okay.
Oh, yes.
So actually these are continuous. So P0 Q0, P1 Q1.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so you are
I got
finding the determinant, then you will get +1 or -1 only.
Okay.
Yeah, alternatively +1 -1 comes. That also you see, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay then. Yeah, fine. We'll stop here.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so any questions? Okay, we'll meet on Monday again. Okay, sorry, there is no class on this Friday. So you can convey to other people, other friends, if you meet them. Anyhow, I'll mail. I will post it. Okay, thanks for attending and staying for throughout. Okay, we'll meet on Monday again. There is no class on Friday. Okay, bye.
Thank you, sir.